Alright, so we're going to wrap this up with animal behavior, and I've tried to kind of really eliminate a lot of stuff and just give you the bare bones of what you should know about animal behavior. A lot of it's kind of common sense. But I want you to be familiar with some vocabulary. So first, an innate behavior or an instinct behavior is a behavior that an organism is born with. It's a behavior that doesn't have to be learned. It is typically genetically programmed, and it's triggered by a simple stimulus. So I'm going to just show you a couple examples. So on the bottom left here, you see a lovebird, and he's tucking papers under his wings, or this may be a female. Lovebirds do not have to learn from their parents how to build a nest. They automatically tuck twigs and things under their wings and then take that over and start building their nest. Another example of this is the cowbird. So this is a cowbird. So with the cowbird, the baby, well, first of all, the mother cowbird, what she does is she flies around and lays her eggs in the nests of other species of birds. She doesn't even build her own nest. The instinct comes in when the baby hatches. When the baby hatches, he will automatically roll all the other eggs out of the nest. They've even put rocks in nests, and he'll roll rocks out of the nest. So this is an instinctual behavior that doesn't have to be learned. And then what ends up happening is the mother of whatever birds were supposed to be in that nest will end up raising the cowbird as their own. So the mom cowbird never actually has to build a nest or raise her own young. She can just go around laying eggs. Bottom right, the snake here, it's actually genetic whether they prefer to eat slugs or not. Dominant likes slugs, recessive don't like slugs. So it's a behavior that has a genetic basis. And on the right here, imprinting. Imprinting is triggered by what the baby sees when it first hatches. So baby ducks are a really good example of this. They will follow their mother, or they'll follow the first thing that they see when they hatch. There are videos I showed in class where baby ducks followed a guy because he was the one that helped hatch all the eggs. Or there was a picture, one where the baby duck was following a dog because it thought the dog was its mom. So these, again, any kind of behavior that the organism is born with. Another example of this I showed in class was the stickleback fish. The stickleback fish, the male is territorial, and he will attack other males. But the way he recognizes the males is that they have a red belly, and the females don't. So when he sees the red belly, they did an experiment where they even painted rocks just red on the bottom. The male stickleback, that's the stimulus, and his response is called a fixed action pattern. He can't change it. He automatically attacks. He can't learn not to do it. He can't stop in the middle of it. He'll just continually attack that rock thinking it's a male. As animals are more complex, their brains are larger, we see that they rely more on more complicated behaviors. And so you can see this picture at the bottom, starting with the simplest animals that rely almost completely on instinct. We, swim towards light, swim away from noise, things like that. As we go up the scale, we see more and more complicated behaviors that require learning, meaning they require exposure. So trial and error, for example, would be where an organism keeps trying something until they succeed. There's also conditioning, operant conditioning, where an organism gets a reward for something so they continue to do it or become better at it, or they associate something with a punishment, and so they avoid that behavior. So, your dog, if you spank your dog when it pees in the house, it learns to go outside because of negative reinforcement. If you give it a treat every time it pees outside, that's positive reinforcement. And insight learning is the most complex. This is where an organism learns to solve a novel problem. And we see insight learning in mammals, in birds. We can see it in all kinds of organisms. And the example I gave in class, I showed a bird, and there was like a piece of food hanging a little too high for the bird to reach. And they put a block in there with him. And he actually figured out within about a minute that he could move the block into position under the food and get on the block, and then he could reach the food. He wasn't trained to do it. He basically figured out a way to get to the food using a novel approach. Okay. Moving on. Altruistic behavior. So altruistic behavior is like a self-sacrificing behavior. Usually you think of this in people, somebody rushes into the burning fire to save the baby or whatever. We see it in nature as well. But what we discover in nature is that animals in nature don't do it because they're getting a pat on the back, or they just, want to feel good about themselves. What we discovered in nature is that animals that perform altruistic behaviors, for example, prairie dogs, they'll have one on scout, and that one would send out a warning call, a scream, telling all the other ones to hide if, say, a predator was coming. The one that's there screaming is putting himself in danger while everybody else is hiding. So why would he do this? Why would he volunteer for this job? Is he just extra brave or whatever? What we discovered in nature is that altruistic behaviors in animals, almost 100% of the time, it's always tightly genetically related animals in the pack. And so by helping the others, even though they're putting themselves in danger, they share genes with the other ones. They have 25% of their genes in common with brothers and sisters. They have 50% of their genes in common with their parents. By putting themselves in danger, even if they don't survive, they're ensuring that their gene pool survives, that their family's genes are getting passed on. We've even seen where a sister bird will help raise the young of her sister because she wasn't able to have young that year, and by helping her sister, it helps to ensure that her sister's babies survive, which means some of her genes, in essence, are getting passed on too, since she shares 25% of her genes with her sister. Social living, animals that live in groups, there are benefits and drawbacks to that. Animals that live in groups, one of the benefits is there's protection from predators. There's safety in numbers. There's also help with the young, things like that. The drawback is that obviously you're going to have all those density-dependent factors. Increased chances of disease. There's going to be competition. So some animals tend to live in groups. Some tend to live solitary. Not like one is better than the other. There's just benefits and drawbacks to both. And then the last section here is on communication. Communication is super important in the animal kingdom because an animal needs to know if another member of the species, for example, is a friend or a foe. A male would want to know when's the right time to mate with a female. A male would want to know if another male was going to attack him. So these are some ways that animals communicate. So pheromones, you should know that a pheromone is a chemical signal that's sent out by one animal to other members of the species. For example, if your male dog pees on every tree when you go for a walk, that's a pheromone in his urine, and he's basically marking that as his territory. Female cats will release pheromones when they are in heat. That will attract males to come mate with them. And they'll mate with every male that shows up. So sometimes a female cat, a stray, she may give birth to a litter of kittens that actually have 3 or 4 different fathers. Not one kitten individual, but among that litter, some kittens have one father, some kittens have another father. Tactile signals are touch. So make sure you know tactile means touch. A good example of that is bees. Bees do this dance called a waggle dance to tell the other bees in the hive where their food is. The other bees literally just feel, they all gather around and feel the direction of this waggle dance, and then they know where to go to get the food. So that's tactile. Visual signals, I showed in class some videos of, for example, birds doing elaborate courtship dances. Dogs, when they show their teeth, that is a signal of aggression. This is also seen in baboons and a lot of animals. You don't want to smile showing your teeth to a stray dog. You are basically showing them a sign of aggression. They think you're growling at them. Whereas another visual signal in dogs, which is this one, which is kind of carried over from wolves, this is a submission signal. Basically, this is their way of saying they want to play or that they don't mean you harm or that they submit to you, which your dog may do this to you. So those are visual signals. And then acoustical signals are sounds. Again, some birds sing elaborate songs. Crickets chirp. There could be all kinds of acoustical signals, sound signals, that could either warn, like I said, the prairie dogs, sending out a warning that there's a predator nearby. Acoustical signals sometimes do have to be learned. For example, with birds, they have to hear the song. If it's, let's say, a male that sings a particular song to get females, he has to be exposed to that song when he's young. If he never hears the song, then once he's an adult, it'll be too late. He wouldn't be able to sing. Or he'll sing, but his song won't make any sense. So he won't be able to mate because he won't attract any females. So these are just some different ways that animals communicate. And that's it. That wraps up ecology.